I did it. I beat Final Fantasy XVI, and I have some thoughts. Let's discuss. What's up, gamers? DreamcastGuy here, and this is going to be a brutally honest review for the game itself, discussing the story, the characters, the combat, and a lot of the strange controversy around this project. Now, first and foremost, this is going to be completely spoiler-free. I'm going to show you some boss fights from sort of later portions of the game, but nothing in actual context that will ruin any of the big surprises, because the story of this is pretty dang fantastic. Let's talk about this, though. Let's actually try and dive deep. Keep in mind, I am a very retro fan of Final Fantasy. I grew up with this franchise. I watched it go from turn-based combat to MMORPGs to weird mixed hybrids of cool different genres, action-focused, more classic, grindy focus. And as a person that did play this back on the PlayStation 1 and the Super Nintendo and stuff, I always loved the character focus and the aesthetic of Final Fantasy. Even the spin-offs, weird stuff like Final Fantasy Explorers or Final Fantasy Realm Reborn, Final Fantasy Tactics. So the biggest controversy I keep seeing pop up is people saying, this isn't really Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy XVI is not my Final Fantasy. And I have to say, as a person that really was there from pretty much the start, this sentiment is very confusing to me. Final Fantasy XVI, deep in its DNA, this is, of course, the newest FF game. It's got Chocobos, it's got Moogles, the costumes, the music. It is definitely, down to its very vibe, it is Final Fantasy. And that's kind of what I love the most about this, is that Final Fantasy XVI, while I was exploring it, it reminded me of how I would imagine Final Fantasy when I was a kid. Obviously, back in the 90s and the early 2000s, they had to have very primitive graphics, stuff that left a lot of room for the imagination to fill in the gaps. And I appreciated that. I mean, my favorite game of all time is the original Final Fantasy VII. I still replay it every single year, defeating the weapons, getting the super skills, getting the best materia like Knights of the Round. But when you're playing that, there is definitely your own thoughts, your own brain power that's being projected onto it. Final Fantasy XVI, to me, feels like the fulfillment of the dream of Final Fantasy. It is that game that has blistering combat, that does have crazy epic moments and 5 staged boss fights and really cool, tiny, peaceful encounters in the countryside. Let me start off by talking about the combat, though, because I really do appreciate that this game gets deeper and deeper the farther into it you go. I've played about 55 hours now of Final Fantasy XVI, and a lot of that was spent, of course, on the main story itself. It takes about 40 hours itself to actually just finish the main campaign, but that's kind of when the game sort of begins if you're a completionist like I am. So when you're playing this, at the start, you just have your fire magic. You got like a Phoenix uppercut. You've got the ability to do some little teleportations. But during each chapter of this, you keep absorbing extra elemental types. Summons in this game are called the Eikons. And as you begin to soak up Garuda and Titan and Bahamut, you grow these extra layers of character depth. What's so incredibly fun is that each of these icons has a different style of combat. Some of them more offensive or defensive. Some of them better about jumping around the battlefield or grabbing people to you, staggering foes. And there's also the ability to unlock additional talents. By going into the ability skill tree, you can choose to make it so you have more long-range abilities, more abilities to just zap people yourself. And I think it's really cool that this game just gets more and more complicated, but at a very good pace. It felt like every 4 hours, I'd unlock a new piece of the skill tree. I'd get a new icon. I'd get that next big advancement in Clive as a character. And in combat, that's neat. I also really freaking loved that they just keep piling up the enemies more and more as you start to clash against entire armies or big, huge dragons and stuff like that. It's really cool that this game constantly feels more epic as you get more practiced at it. I have to say, the combat all around to me is a 10 out of 10. I never got bored of it. I always actually would jump into every single skirmish with a big old smile on my face. But I will say, I understand the people that are a little bit scared of it. I certainly see some of the most classic Final Fantasy fans intimidated because, this is a big departure. Even if you played Final Fantasy XV, which did have more action-focused combat, you could still hold a single button to dodge. You could still hold a single button to dish out attacks. You could still pause time to throw potions. Final Fantasy XVI requires you do perfect dodges. It really requires that you actually pay attention to the different phases of boss fight to see the different moves they're dishing out. To me, that's glorious, but I understand why really retro fans like myself might sometimes be a little bit, off-put by that. Now, I want to talk about the story for a bit in a completely spoiler-free fashion. I loved the plot in this game. The writing is absolutely top freaking notch. It feels so much like Final Fantasy Tactics. If you never played Tactics, it is a deep political intrigue game filled with a million perfect quotes. Characters constantly trying to screw each other over or do a power play or invade a rival nation to try and get a little ounce of more power. Seeing that incredibly bleak universe, that incredibly foreboding onslaught of impossible missions being carried over in a vibe, at least, to Final Fantasy XVI, this feels like classic Final Fantasy. That foreboding, crazy, epic, you are screwed even if you win. They brought that back. And I have to say, I think that is incredibly cool. But I have noticed a particular critique of this pop up a lot, which is that the story in a lot of Final Fantasies is based on the party itself. If you're going into a dungeon or trying to sit around a dinner table, the characters conversing is a lot of times how we get the most important plot, right? Think of things like the scenes in Gold Saucer in Final Fantasy VII, or times in Final Fantasy VIII when you're reconvening to talk to Headmaster Cid at the Balam Garden. Each of the games always managed to really have that that friends winning together tone, whereas Final Fantasy XVI is heavily focused purely on Clive, for better and for worse. If you like Clive, which it does seem like 99% of people do, he is a great projection of ourselves. He is the person that's trying to figure out how to survive, the person that's trying to figure out how to get revenge, how to get power, how to actually make it out of the situation with a bit of sanity and hope intact. That to me is incredibly cool, but the best side character and the person that, in my opinion, makes this game instantly 3 times better is this guy, Cidolfus. Cid is amazing. I can't even get into all the spoilers I want to talk about him, but he is just a character that is so well acted. He's so charming. He's so witty. He is a soldier that's willing to bash back the Empire. And on top of that, I do want to mention there is this cool underlying trend of magic having a cost throughout Final Fantasy XVI. People that use a bunch of magic actually slowly turn to stone, and whether it is the giant mother crystals or the little tiny gems that random civilians are using to start fires or heal wounds. I like the idea that magic has a universal cost. It's not just about mana. It's not just about cooldowns. I like that there is a plot relevant cost that we see taking place. And Cid brings that up. Cid brings that real costly humanity because he is that jaded older gentleman, the person that's been in this war for so long, who's saved so many people, who's killed so many people. He is such a great side character for Clive to deal with. The way that they grapple and talk about ideas and stuff. The story in this game is so purely Final Fantasy that even when it comes to the boardroom meetings and stuff, watching these kingdoms have diplomatic peace treaties and stuff, I love the story of Final Fantasy XVI, at least the main plot. Now, let's talk a bit about what I did not love in this game. There's only two aspects of this that I'm just not super thrilled about. Part of it does come down to the fact that, honestly, the side quests feel like Final Fantasy XIV, the MMORPG. Now, in a lot of MMOs, because I do like playing online games, they are fun, they're good, busy work with good rewards, but they're not exactly exciting, if you catch my drift. Most of the side quests I've done in this are like slaying random wolves. There's a cool bounty board where you usually go and find a particularly powerful random enemy and kill them for a bonus reward. Sometimes you do get some quests where you save some chocobos from some bandits and now you're able to ride a chocobo. But for the most part, the side content, it really feels like an afterthought. It really feels like they made the entire game and they went, oh, we should just put in some extra little bits and bobs to populate the world. A lot of this stuff, it feels so irrelevant that I pretty much skipped a lot of it. I'm going to go back and do a lot of it now because the game is done and I want to actually really grind stuff out. But as actual content, it's not as nearly engaging as the epic main tale is. Now, the other minor problem I have is that the frame rate is still so incredibly inconsistent. I'm recording this a week after launch at this point, and we've had no real discussions about a performance patch. I'm playing this in the performance mode, which is supposed to be 60 frames a second. There's a lot of frame stuttering. I think it's really cool that this game seems so heavily based on dungeons. You get a chance to explore the countryside and then go into like fallen kingdoms and different cool ruins and stuff like that. But a lot of these places, it feels like it's trying to compensate for the lack of loading screens by populating areas late, and it causes frame rate drops. I don't know. Something about the frame rate being so wonky is a bit strange because the game looks great. It runs great at times. So when it looks bad, it looks very bad. Overall, as a classic Final Fantasy fan, I am so overwhelmingly pleased with this. This reminds me of classic Final Fantasy so much. This reminds me of like those big epic emerald weapon fights and stuff like Final Fantasy VII. This reminds me of Final Fantasy X when you're trying to take on the different summons themselves. This feels like, honestly, this feels like the future of Final Fantasy. So I understand that some people are not completely on board with it, but as a person that's watched the evolution of this saga, this feels like a brilliant next step. I guess we're going to see. I have a feeling that we're going to get a turn-based version of this. I kind of get an idea that we might see some sort of 16-bit version demake of this game at some point. There's like sprites and stuff in this game that looks so good. The music is so good. I would not be shocked if they released a Nintendo Switch version of this game that's all 16-bit. And to be honest, the story is so great, I would play through all of this again as a turn-based RPG in a millisecond, and I'm sure I'd love it even freaking more. It's difficult to put a score on a game like this because it is just so huge in scope, but I'm going to try my best. We've heard some good and some bad. Let's go over to the ratings board and put a big number on it. I am giving Final Fantasy XVI a 9.5 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching, gamers. If you enjoyed this video, give it a big old thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. And please keep dreaming. I do want to quickly say, I played this without a strategy guide. I played most of it before the game came out, and now I finished it after my trip. Something about going into a Final Fantasy game completely blind is just the greatest pleasure in my entire life. I love fumbling around and trying to figure stuff out because, man, is this game good. Thanks for watching this video. I know I'm putting it out a week after launch. Hopefully people actually watch it. I have no idea. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.